Michelin. Look at you.
Then would come 1985, and with the new year, Touchstone Films would take things back to basics. Baby Secret of the Lost Legend would be released in late March of 1985. The story centered on a couple who discover a mother and baby brontosaurus in Africa, and of course will have to fight to protect them from violent poachers, and this heartwarming dino adventure was sadly not the crowd pleaser Touchstone Films had hoped to kick the year off with. Baby Secret of the Lost Legend would open with a $4 million weekend, but it was also competing against The Last Dragon, Porky's Revenge, and Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, all of which opened on the weekend of the 22nd. So competition was tough, and this movie would only manage to take the number 5 spot at the box office, and just after 3 weeks, it was already out of the theater with a meager $14.9 million on a $13 million budget. Now, I do think this is a decent film. I enjoyed it as a kid and I watched it a ton, but what does that tell you? Touchstone was regressing back to kids' movies with adult themes, and it had failed them once again. This movie would get recut and get a new name, Dinosaur Secret of the Lost Legend, which would play on NBC's The Magical World of Disney, so I assume that's where I watched it the most when I was a kid. And this was another of those movies that just seemed to be on cable every weekend around lunchtime during the mid-80s. It's your typical emotionally driven adventure for kids. The cast is solid and the scoring from Jerry Goldsmith is perfectly calibrated to the dramatic undercurrent of the plot. The effects are naturally dated and it's a little dark in places, like many kid-themed movies were during the era, and today it certainly has this nostalgia factor, but for Touchstone Films at the time, it was a financial disappointment.